In the quiet, windowless corridors of the Pentagon, a single intelligence report shatters the fragile promise of global peace. It is the autumn of 1966, and the cold logic of mutually assured destruction is dissolving under the weight of a terrifying new Soviet capability. This is the moment the United States leadership realizes that the existing machines of war are no longer enough to save civilization. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara sits at the center of this gathering storm. For years, the strategic balance between the superpowers has rested on a grim mathematical certainty. If one side attacks, the other will have enough surviving weapons to retaliate and destroy the aggressor. It is a suicide pact that has kept the world from burning. But now, the math is changing. Soviet engineers are deploying the R-36, an intercontinental ballistic missile of unprecedented size and power. These are not merely weapons of terror, they are weapons of precision. Intelligence indicates the R-36 carries warheads accurate enough to locate and destroy American missile silos buried deep within the Earth. At the same time, satellite imagery reveals that the Soviet Union is constructing elaborate anti-ballistic missile defenses around Moscow. They are building a shield to stop American retaliation while forging a sword capable of breaking America's nuclear spine. The implication is chilling. If the Soviets can destroy American land-based missiles in a first strike and shoot down the few that remain, nuclear war becomes winnable. The deterrence equation is collapsing. McNamara knows that simply building more of the same weapons will not solve this problem. The United States needs a revolutionary response, a system that cannot be targeted, cannot be tracked, and cannot be destroyed. On November 1st, 1966, he issues a directive that will alter the course of naval history. He commissions the Strategic Experimental Study, known simply as Strat-X. The mandate is breathtaking in its scope. McNamara hands the project to the Institute for Defense Analysis with a single overriding instruction: ignore politics, ignore tradition, and ignore the bureaucracy. Find what works. To lead this effort, the Pentagon turns to General Maxwell Taylor, the legendary commander of the 101st Airborne Division, who parachuted into Normandy on D-Day. Taylor is a soldier who understands that in war, the only thing that matters is the result. For the next 9 months, the finest minds in American defense vanish into secure conference rooms. They're given free rein to examine every conceivable method of delivering a nuclear warhead. The resulting report fills 20 volumes and evaluates more than 125 different missile systems. The proposals range from the pragmatic to the nearly science-fictional. Some engineers propose hiding ballistic missiles on unmanned barges that would drift aimlessly through the American canal systems, blending in with commercial traffic. Others suggest concealing missiles inside the hulls of standard civilian cargo ships, indistinguishable from thousands of other freighters on the high seas. One concept calls for a massive new aircraft capable of carrying intercontinental ballistic missiles aloft and dropping them from the stratosphere. However, as the team sifts through the data, 3 sea-based concepts rise to the top. The logic is undeniable. The oceans cover 70% of the Earth's surface. They are opaque, vast, and indifferent to borders. If a weapon can hide in the deep ocean, it becomes immune to the R-36. It becomes immune to satellite surveillance. It restores the balance of terror. The most promising proposal in the Strat-X report outlines a dedicated submarine designed for a single purpose. Unlike previous vessels that were adapted from attack submarine designs, this new boat would be a true underwater missile battery. The initial concept calls for a slow, lumbering vessel optimized purely for stealth. The designers envision a submarine that drifts silently in the deep, carrying its payload of missiles inside the pressure hull for maximum protection. They prioritize silence above all else, willing to sacrifice speed and maneuverability to ensure the boat remains a ghost. But this design philosophy collides with the iron will of Admiral Hyman Rickover. Known as the father of the nuclear navy, Rickover is a man of uncompromising standards and ferocious intellect. He reviews the proposed slow-speed design and rejects it immediately. To Rickover, a submarine that cannot run is a coffin waiting to be nailed shut. He argues that stealth is not enough. The ocean is a dynamic, dangerous environment, and enemy anti-submarine warfare is evolving rapidly. Rickover demands a platform capable of high-speed withdrawal. He envisions a boat that can launch its missiles and then sprint away before enemy destroyers or attack submarines can converge on its position. He insists on a power plant that can drive a massive hull at high speeds without compromising the acoustic advantage. The conflict between the Stratex analysts and the Naval Reactors branch shapes the final blueprint of the Ohio class. The compromise results in a Leviathan. The new submarine will be built around a massive nuclear reactor, far larger than anything previously installed in a submarine. This power plant will grant the vessel the speed Rickover demands, but the hull itself will be shaped by the Strat-X requirement for massive firepower. It must be large enough to contain 24 ballistic missiles, each capable of striking targets thousands of miles away with multiple warheads. This is a significant leap forward. Previous American ballistic missile submarines carried only 16 missiles. The new design increases the payload by 50%. It transforms a single vessel into a strategic superpower capable of delivering more explosive energy than all the bombs dropped in the Second World War combined. The design is finalized, the contracts are signed, and the United States Navy prepares to build the ultimate deterrent. The work begins in the shipyards of Groton, Connecticut. This is not just another construction project, it is a national priority. The Ohio class represents the technological peak of American engineering, but bringing it from blueprints to steel requires an industrial effort that rivals the space program. The sheer scale of the components forces the shipbuilders to rethink how submarines are assembled. As the 1960s bleed into the 1970s, the political landscape shifts, but the threat remains. The Cold War settles into a long, grinding stare-down. In the background, the shipyards hum with activity. The first hull, USS Ohio, begins to take shape. But the program is designed to produce a fleet, a succession of identical giants that will patrol the oceans for decades. It is against this backdrop of high-stakes engineering and geopolitical tension that the timeline arrives at a singular, symbolic date. July 4, 1976. The United States is celebrating its bicentennial. From the harbor of New York to the small towns of the Midwest, fireworks explode in the summer sky. Tall ships parade past the Statue of Liberty. Millions of Americans gather to mark 200 years of independence, looking back on a history of revolution and resilience. The mood is patriotic, nostalgic, and loud. But inside the sprawling industrial complex of the Electric Boat Division in Groton, a different kind of ceremony is taking place. There are no crowds of tourists here, no televised parades. The audience consists of hard-hatted shipwrights, welders, engineers, and naval officers. They gather around a massive steel assembly in the building ways. On this day, while the rest of the country looks to the past, these workers are laying the foundation for the future. They are laying the keel of the submarine that will become the USS Florida. At this moment, she has no name. She is simply a hull number, a contract, a collection of specifications on a blueprint. But the men and women standing on the concrete floor know exactly what they are building. They are building a machine designed to end civilization. The gravity of the task stands in stark contrast to the festivities outside. The fireworks bursting over the Thames River mimic the destruction this vessel is built to unleash. The workers understand that if this submarine ever fulfills its primary function, the country celebrating its 200th birthday will likely cease to exist. The purpose of the Florida is to ensure that day never comes. The keel laying is the first physical step in a journey that will span decades. It is the transition from the theoretical debates of the Pentagon to the heavy industrial reality of steel and fire. The Ohio-class design, born from McNamara's panic and Rickover's stubbornness, is finally becoming a tangible object. As the first steel plates are welded together, the scale of the etched undertaking becomes clear. The Florida will not be a conversion or a retrofit. She is being purpose-built from the bottom up to dominate the underwater domain. The engineers have promised a boat that is faster, quieter, and more lethal than anything the world has ever seen. Now, they have to prove they can build it. The challenges ahead are immense. The specifications call for a hull nearly 2 football fields in length. The acoustic requirements demand a level of silence that seems physically impossible, requiring machinery to be isolated from the hull in ways never before attempted. The nuclear reactor must be powerful enough to drive 18,000 tons of steel through the water at high speeds, yet quiet enough to remain undetectable to enemy sonar. On this bicentennial night, as the last fireworks fade and the smoke drifts over the shipyard, the keel of the Florida sits silent on the blocks. The celebration is over. The race to build the Ghost is just beginning. The Cold War is entering a new, more dangerous phase, and the United States Navy needs this ship. The Soviet shipyards are churning out their own monsters, the Typhoon and Delta classes, pushing the arms race deeper into the ocean. The Florida is America's answer. She's a child of the 1960s fear, born into the 1970s reality, destined to fight a war that everyone hopes will remain cold. As the workers file out of the shipyard, leaving the silent steel behind, the clock starts ticking. It will take 5 years to turn this keel into a living warship. 5 years of welding, wiring, testing, and sweating. But on this historic night, the commitment is made. The spearhead of modern naval warfare has been forged. The story of the USS Florida has begun, not with a launch, but with a promise made in steel. As the late 1970s unfold, the electric boat shipyard in Groton transforms into a theater of industrial ambition. The keel laying was merely the prologue. Now, the true complexity of the Ohio-class project begins to reveal itself. Building the USS Florida is not simply a matter of bending steel into a tube. It requires the integration of a city's worth of machinery into a pressure vessel that must withstand the crushing weight of the deep ocean while remaining silent enough to vanish. The construction method itself is revolutionary. In previous eras, submarines were largely built piece by piece on the slipway. For the Florida and her sisters, the Navy adopts a modular approach that staggers the imagination. The hull is not built as a single unit, but as a series of massive cylinders fabricated miles away at Quonset Point, Rhode Island. Each of these hull sections measures 42 feet in diameter. To visualize this scale, one must imagine a 4-story building laid on its side. These are not empty shells. Workers at Quonset Point pre-install the internal decks, the cabling, the piping, and the heavy machinery before the sections are ever joined together. It is a logistical ballet of immense proportions. The sections are loaded onto barges and towed along the coast to Groton, where they are welded together to form the complete submarine. When the pieces are finally joined, the dimensions of the USS Florida become undeniable. She stretches 560 feet from bow to stern. She is nearly twice the size of the Lafayette-class boats she is designed to replace. When submerged, she will displace 18,750 tons of water. She is a Leviathan, the largest submarine ever constructed by the United States Navy. But size is not the primary objective. Stealth is everything. The engineers tasked with designing the Florida face a challenge that borders on the impossible. The Navy specification demands that the Ohio class be 1,000 times quieter than the previous generation of ballistic missile submarines. In the unforgiving physics of underwater warfare, noise is death. A noisy submarine is a target. A silent submarine is a weapon. The goal is to reduce the acoustic signature of this massive machine to the level of biological noise. This is the term the acousticians use for the background static of the ocean itself. The snapping of shrimp, the calls of whales, the friction of water against rock. The USS Florida must sound less like a nuclear-powered warship and more like a drifting school of fish. To achieve this, the designers look across the Atlantic. They study the innovations of the British Royal Navy, specifically the Swiftsure-class attack submarines. The British have pioneered a technique known as rafting. The American engineers take this concept and apply it on a massive scale. Inside the Florida, the machinery does not touch the hull. The turbines, the pumps, the generators, and the motors are all mounted on massive steel rafts. These rafts, in turn, are suspended on sophisticated rubber shock absorbers and vibration dampeners. The entire propulsion plant floats inside the submarine, isolated from the steel skin. When a motor spins, the vibration is absorbed by the raft, then by the mounts, dissipating before it can travel through the hull and into the water where enemy sonar might hear it. Special attention is paid to the transmission system. In a standard ship, the gears connecting the turbines to the propeller shaft are a primary source of high-pitched whine. On the Florida, precision engineering reduces this friction to a whisper. The hull itself is coated with thousands of specialized acoustic tiles. These rubberized slabs serve a dual purpose. They dampen internal noise, keeping it inside the boat, and they absorb active sonar pings from enemy ships, preventing a return echo. The submarine is designed to be a black hole in the water. However, the heart of the Florida is her power plant, and this is where the greatest engineering leap occurs. General Electric delivers the SHG pressurized water reactor. The statistics of this machine are staggering. The reactor compartment alone is 42 feet in diameter and 55 feet long, weighing 2,750 tons. It is a dense, heavy monument to nuclear physics. In previous submarines, the reactors produced about 11 megawatts of thermal power. The SHG produces 220 megawatts. This is not an incremental update. It is an explosion of capability. But power usually generates noise. Nuclear reactors require coolant pumps to keep the core from melting down, and pumps are notoriously loud. The genius of the SHG design lies in a principle called natural circulation. The engineers designed the reactor coolant loops to take advantage of simple thermodynamics. Hot water rises. Cool water sinks. The SHG is built so that, at low and medium speeds, the coolant flows through the core naturally, driven by its own heat. This means that for the vast majority of her patrol, the USS Florida does not need to run her reactor coolant pumps at all. She can move through the ocean at operational speeds, with her primary noise source turned off. She glides on a current of thermal physics. Only when the captain orders a high-speed sprint do the pumps kick in, and even then, they're quieter than anything previously built. Year after year, the workers at Electric Boat labor to integrate these systems. Through the late 1970s and into the dawn of the 1980s, the Florida evolves from a hollow tube into a living organism. Miles of cable are pulled. Thousands of valves are tested. The two crews, designated Blue and Gold, begin to form and train, learning the anatomy of a ship that is still being born. On November 14, 1981, the moment of public revelation arrives. The shipyard is decorated in red, white, and blue bunting. A crowd gathers by the Thames River to witness the christening. Mrs. Marcia Carlucci, wife of the Deputy Secretary of Defense, stands on the platform with a traditional swing of the bottle and a few spoken words. The massive hull is officially named Florida. She is the second ship of the Ohio class and the second Navy vessel to bear the name of the Sunshine State. The launch is a spectacle of physics. The locking mechanisms are released and 18,000 tons of steel slide backward down the greased wooden ways. Gravity takes hold. The stern hits the water, throwing up a massive spray, and for a heart-stopping moment, the submarine bobs and settles. She floats, The cheers of the shipbuilders echo off the steel, celebrating 5 years of grueling labor. But a floating hull is not a warship. The most dangerous phase of testing lies ahead. On November 13, 1982, exactly 1 year after her launch, the reactor team brings the S8G critical for the first time. The control rods are withdrawn by fractions of an inch. The uranium atoms in the core begin to split. Heat builds, steam generates, the turbines spin. The Florida is now alive, powered by the elemental force of the universe. In January 1983, the crew moves aboard. The smell of fresh paint mixes with the distinct metallic scent of recycled atmosphere that defines life on a submarine. On February 21st, Florida casts off her lines for initial sea trials. Sea trials are a test of faith. The crew must trust the welds, the seals, and the math. They take the submarine into the deep Atlantic waters off the Connecticut coast. They conduct the deep dive, taking the boat down to her test depth. As the depth gauge climbs, the hull groans under the immense pressure of the ocean. The steel compresses, the diameter of the boat actually shrinking by inches as the water tries to crush it. The crew listens to every pop and creak, waiting for the leak that doesn't come. They test the speed. The Florida sprints, her reactor unleashing its full 220 megawatts. The bow wave creates a mountain of water as the submarine tears through the depths. Most importantly, they test the silence. Acoustic sensors monitor the boat as she executes her maneuvers. The results are beyond the designer's wildest hopes. The USS Ohio had already proven the concept, but Florida confirms it. The data shows that the Ohio-class submarines are quieter traveling at 20 knots than the older Lafayette-class boats were at 6 knots. The natural circulation reactor works perfectly. The rafting system absorbs the machinery noise. The acoustic tiles swallow the sonar. The Florida is not just quiet, she's effectively a hole in the water. The biological noise goal has been met. To an enemy sonar operator, the USS Florida sounds like nothing more than the ocean itself. On May 17, 1983, the builders deliver the submarine to the United States Navy. The delivery comes 43 days ahead of schedule, a rare triumph in the world of military procurement. The Navy accepts the vessel with gratitude. The Cold War is freezing over again, and the strategic balance requires every advantage. A month later, on June 18, 1983, the commissioning ceremony takes place. The stars and stripes are hoisted. Captain William L. Powell assumes command of the Blue Crew, while Captain George R. Sterner takes charge of the Gold Crew. 2 complete crews, 155 men each, stand ready to rotate custody of the vessel. The Florida is now a commissioned warship of the United States. She has passed her trials. She has proven her engineering. She is massive, she is silent, and she is ready. The construction phase is over. The shipyard workers wipe their hands and move on to the next hull. For the crew of the USS Florida, the reality of their mission is about to settle in. They have been given the keys to the most destructive weapon system in human history. Now, they must take it out to sea and hide. The engineering miracle is complete. The long, silent watch is about to begin. As the excitement of sea trials fades and the shipyard workers return to their lives on land, the USS Florida begins the solitary existence for which she was designed. The commissioning streamers are packed away, the speeches are forgotten. The submarine is no longer a construction project. She is now a deployed asset of the United States strategic arsenal. In February 1984, the Florida departs the Atlantic. Her destination is the Pacific Ocean, where she will join the silent front line of the Cold War. To get there, she must navigate the Panama Canal, a feat that demonstrates the sheer scale of the Ohio class. This transit is a claustrophobic evolution. The canal locks were built in the early 20th century for a different era of shipping, and the Florida is a monster of the jet age. At 560 feet long, she fills the concrete chamber like a cork in a bottle. The 42-foot beam leaves almost no margin for error. As the water rises, the crew members standing topside watch the wet concrete walls slide past, mere feet away from the expensive acoustic tiles. Tugboats guide the Leviathan with delicate precision, ensuring the hidden propeller does not strike the masonry. It is a slow, tense passage, physically moving a weapon of the apocalypse from one ocean to another. She emerges into the Pacific and turns north. On March 25, 1984, the Florida arrives at Naval Submarine Base Bangor in Washington State. Nestled along the Hood Canal, protected by layers of security fencing and the natural isolation of the Pacific Northwest pine forests, Bangor is the fortress of the ballistic missile fleet. This will be her home for the next 18 years. Here, the rhythm of the Long Watch begins. It is a rhythm defined by the unique crew structure of the ballistic missile force. To maximize the return on the immense financial investment of the Ohio class, the Navy cannot afford for the boat to sit idle while sailors rest. The solution is the two-crew system. The blue crew and the gold crew operate like shift workers on a planetary scale. When the blue crew takes the submarine out for a 70-day patrol, the gold crew remains ashore, training, studying, and spending time with their families. When the blue crew returns, exhausted and pale, they conduct a brief, intense handover period. They pass the keys, quite literally, to the gold crew, who immediately take the boat back out to sea. The machine hardly ever rests. It is either patrolling the deep or undergoing maintenance. On July 25, 1984, the USS Florida completes her first strategic deterrent patrol. The blue crew brings her home after 2.5 months submerged. The details of where they went and what they did remain classified, locked in the archives of the Navy. This secrecy is the currency of deterrence. If the adversary knows where the submarine is, the weapon is useless. The Florida does not patrol to find the enemy. She patrols to ensure the enemy can never find her. Life aboard the submarine settles into a routine that is both monotonous and mentally grueling. The crew operates on an 18-hour day rather than a 24-hour cycle. The day is divided into 3 6-hour shifts, 6 hours on watch, 6 hours of maintenance or study, and 6 hours of sleep. This artificial time compression wreaks havoc on the biological clock. There are no windows, there is no sunlight. The only difference between noon and midnight is the dimming of the red lights in the control room. The men live in a steel tube surrounded by crushing pressure. They breathe recycled air that is scrubbed of carbon dioxide and enriched with oxygen generated from seawater. The atmosphere has a distinct metallic taste that permeates clothing and food. They drink water distilled from the ocean. They eat meals prepared from stores that were frozen months ago. The cooks perform culinary miracles in a galley the size of a walk-in closet, serving 4 meals a day to keep up with the rotating watches. Personal space is non-existent. In the enlisted berthing, bunks are stacked 3 high, often with a curtain, providing the only privacy a sailor will know for months. Officers share tiny staterooms that double as offices. The captain alone possesses a private cabin, and even that is barely larger than a pantry. But the physical confinement is secondary to the psychological burden. Every man on board knows exactly what he is carrying. Just aft of the control room lies the missile compartment, a vast, vertical forest of steel. 2 rows of 12 launch tubes stretch from the keel to the upper deck. Inside each tube sits a Trident C-4 missile, a 30-ton rocket standing 44 feet tall. These are not defensive weapons. They are city killers. Each missile carries 8 independent nuclear warheads. With 24 missiles, the Florida carries 192 separate nuclear weapons. The total explosive yield is approximately 19 megatons. To put this in perspective, the Florida alone possesses enough firepower to incinerate 192 major cities. It carries more destructive force than was unleashed in all the wars of human history combined. The crew walks past these tubes on their way to lunch. They sleep next to them. They exercise on treadmills wedged between the launch cylinders. The presence of the apocalypse is mundane, tangible, and constant. The sailors are trained to maintain these systems with a religious devotion to detail, knowing that their primary measure of success is that the missiles never fly. The patrol is a game of patience. The Florida moves slowly through her assigned box of ocean. She stays deep, hiding in the thermal layers that confuse sonar. She trails a floating wire antenna to receive encrypted orders from the National Command Authority. She never transmits. To transmit is to reveal your location. She simply listens, waits, and drifts. But this silence is periodically shattered by the sudden, adrenaline-fueled violence of drills. The announcement, "Man Battle Station's Missile," sends the crew sprinting to their posts. In the Missile Control Center, officers produce the keys. They unlock the firing panels. They simulate the receipt of a validated launch order. For the next few minutes, the crew rehearses the end of the world. They spin up the missile gyros. They pressurize the launch tubes. They go through every step of the checklist except the final turn of the key. Then the drill ends. The tension evaporates. The crew returns to cleaning stations or reading books. The simulation of mass destruction compartmentalized and put away until next time. Through the mid-1980s, this cycle repeats. Patrol after patrol. The Florida becomes a veteran of the deep. Captains rotate. The blue crew hands off to gold. Gold hands off to blue. Then the world begins to change. In 1989, the Berlin Wall falls. The Iron Curtain that had divided Europe for 40 years crumbles under the weight of history. In 1991, the Soviet Union itself collapses. The great adversary, the threat that justified the existence of the Florida and her 18 sister ships, ceases to exist. Yet the patrols do not stop. The geopolitical map has been redrawn, but the logic of nuclear deterrence remains absolute. Chaos in the former Soviet republics creates new uncertainties. The rise of other nuclear powers ensures that the need for a survivable deterrent persists. The Florida continues her silent loops in the Pacific, a Cold War warrior operating in a post-Cold War vacuum. The patrol numbers climb steadily. Patrol 20, Patrol 30, Patrol 40. The crew changes faces. A new generation of sailors who were children when the keel was laid now walking the decks. The boat earns awards for battle efficiency. She becomes known as a reliable workhorse, a happy ship in fleet parlance, despite the grim nature of her cargo. In May 2001, the Florida completes patrol number 56. This marks a historic milestone for the submarine force. It is the 500th Strategic Deterrent Patrol conducted by the United States Navy since the ballistic missile program began in 1960. For 41 years, through crises and calm, there has always been a boomer hiding somewhere in the ocean. The Florida carries that legacy forward. But by 2002, the Florida is approaching her 20th birthday. She has conducted 61 patrols. The salt water and the pressure cycles are taking their toll. More importantly, the strategic requirement has shifted. The Pentagon conducts a nuclear posture review and determines that the United States no longer needs 18 Ohio-class submarines to maintain deterrence. 14 will suffice. This decision places the USS Florida and 3 of her sisters, Ohio, Michigan, and Georgia, at a crossroads. They are the oldest boats in the class. The standard procedure would be to decommission them. They have served their purpose. They won the Cold War without firing a shot. The logical step is to send them to the scrapyard to cut up the hulls and recycle the steel. But the Navy looks at the Florida and sees something else. They see a hull that is still sound. They see a reactor that has decades of life left. They see a platform that is quieter than anything else in the ocean and possesses an internal volume that is unmatched by any attack submarine. A radical idea takes shape. What if the Florida didn't have to carry nuclear missiles? What if this massive truck could be reloaded with a different kind of cargo? The concept of the Guided Missile Submarine, or SSGN, is born. The Navy proposes ripping out the nuclear heart of the boat, the Trident missiles, and replacing them with conventional Tomahawk cruise missiles and special operations equipment. Instead of a doomsday device, the Florida could become a clandestine striker, capable of parking off a hostile coast and delivering precision attacks or deploying Navy SEALs under the cover of darkness. It is a bold, expensive gamble. It requires gutting a nuclear-certified warship and rebuilding it from the inside out. On September 5, 2002, the USS Florida departs Bangor for her 61st and final strategic deterrent patrol. When the Blue crew brings her home, the keys to the nuclear missiles will be turned in for the last time. The long watch is over. The mission that defined her existence for 2 decades is finished. But the Florida is not going to the scrapyard. She's heading for a dry dock in Virginia. The Cold War is history, but a new kind of warfare is emerging, one defined by terrorism, rogue states, and the need for surgical precision. The Florida is about to undergo a metamorphosis that will strip away her identity as a nuclear deterrent and forge her into something entirely new. The transition from a Cold War sentinel to a 21st century street fighter begins with a change of command that is more than ceremonial. It is a fundamental rewiring of the ship's human element. In December 2002, the decades-old rhythm of blue and gold crews, the alternating teams that kept the Florida at sea for 19 years, comes to an abrupt halt. The 2 crews are merged. They become a single entity, designated the Green Crew, under the command of Commander David Duryea. Their mission is no longer to patrol the deep Pacific in silence. Their mission is to sail the boat to the Atlantic and prepare her for surgery. The Florida transits the Panama Canal again, reversing the journey she made as a new ship in 1984. She leaves the isolation of Bangor, Washington, and arrives in Norfolk, Virginia, on December 19, 2002. The atmosphere is different here. Norfolk is the heart of the Atlantic Fleet, a bustling hub of carriers and destroyers. The Florida pulls into the pier, a relic of a bygone strategic era, awaiting a decision that will determine her future relevance. But before the torches can cut into her hull, the Navy must prove that the concept of a guided missile submarine is actually viable. The engineers have done the math. They believe that an Ohio-class boat can launch Tomahawk cruise missiles from the same tubes that once held nuclear rockets. But belief is not data. They need to see it happen in the real world. In January 2003, the Florida sails south to the warm, clear waters off the Bahamas. She is participating in an experiment with the code name Giant Shadow. This is a test designed to stretch the imagination of naval planners. The goal is to validate the core capabilities of the SSGN program before billions of dollars are committed to the shipyard availability. On January 14th, the submarine descends to launch depth. In the control room, the fire control technicians are not targeting a Soviet missile silo or a strategic command bunker. They are inputting coordinates for a test range. The order is given. For the first time in history, a Tomahawk cruise missile erupts from the vertical tube of an Ohio-class submarine. It is a strange sight. The tube is 7 feet wide, designed for a massive Trident missile. The Tomahawk is much smaller, a slender dart compared to the sledgehammer it replaces. But the launch is flawless. The missile broaches the surface, sheds its booster, and transitions to cruise flight. 2 days later, they do it again. The Giant Shadow experiment proves the thesis. The gas generators, the launch dynamics, and the fire control software all work. The Florida can be more than a nuclear silent partner. She can be an active shooter. The green light is lit. The conversion is a go. On May 27, 2003, the USS Florida enters the Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Portsmouth, Virginia. On July 8th, the dry dock gates close and the water is pumped out. The massive hull settles onto the keel blocks. Workers swarm over the vessel, erecting scaffolding and running temporary services. This will be her home for the next 3 years. The project is officially titled the Engineered Refueling Overhaul and SSGN conversion. It is a bureaucratic name for a billion-dollar resurrection. The scope of work is staggering. The reactor, the beating heart of the ship, must be refueled. This involves cutting into the pressure hull to access the core, removing the spent uranium fuel cells that have driven the ship since 1981, and installing new cores capable of powering the vessel for another 20 years. Simultaneously, the missile compartment is gutted. The 24 Trident C-4 ballistic missiles are removed. These weapons, the reason for the Florida's existence, are hoisted out of their tubes by cranes, de-warheaded, and trucked away. The empty tubes, vast steel cylinders that run through the ship like elevator shafts, are stripped of their original hydraulic and electronic systems. But industrial work on a nuclear vessel carries inherent risks. On August 27, 2003, just weeks after the conversion begins, the routine of the shipyard is shattered by an alarm. At 10:15 in the morning, smoke begins to fill the spaces near the reactor compartment. A fire has broken out. In a shipyard environment where hoses and cables run through open hatches and systems are tagged out for maintenance, fire is the ultimate nightmare. The danger is acute. The reactor is shut down and cool, but it is still a nuclear system containing radioactive material. If the fire spreads to the core, or if it damages the critical safety systems, the incident could escalate into a radiological emergency. For 10 terrifying minutes, the shipyard firefighters and the ship's force battle the blaze. They move through the smoke-filled narrow passageways, dragging hoses, fighting to locate the source. The shipyard comes to a standstill, but the training holds. The fire is located, contained, and extinguished before it can breach the reactor compartment. The investigation follows, safety protocols are tightened, and the work resumes. The near disaster serves as a stark reminder that even in dry dock, a submarine is a dangerous machine that demands respect. As the months turn into years, the Florida is slowly rebuilt from the inside out. The engineering solution for the missiles is a marvel of efficiency. The designers have created a system called the Multiple All-Up Round Canister, or MASI. Instead of one giant missile per tube, the MACI system allows 7 Tomahawk cruise missiles to be packed into a single cylinder, like bullets in a revolver. The workers install these systems into 22 of the ship's 24 missile tubes. The math is simple but devastating. 7 missiles per tube times 22 tubes equals 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles. This number is transformative. A standard attack submarine might carry 12 to 20 Tomahawks. A surface destroyer might carry 40 or 50. The USS Florida now carries 154. She has become a floating magazine, capable of delivering a volume of fire that can suppress an entire nation's air defense network in a single night. But the conversion is not just about missiles. The Navy anticipates a future where conflicts will be fought in the shadows, requiring small teams of elite operators rather than massed armies. The Florida is adapted to become the ultimate taxi for the Navy SEALs. Tubes 1 and 2 are not fitted with missiles. Instead, they are converted into lockout chambers. These are sophisticated airlocks that allow divers to exit and enter the submarine while it remains submerged. The spaces are plumbed with high-pressure air and mixed gas systems to support deep diving operations. The interior of the ship is reconfigured to match. The designers carve out new berthing spaces in the missile compartment. Bunks, lockers, and planning rooms are added to accommodate 66 Special Operations Forces personnel. This is a platoon-sized element living and working inside the submarine for weeks at a time. The Florida can now carry a SEAL team, their weapons, their inflatable boats, and even a mini-submarine called the Advanced SEAL Delivery System, which can be mounted on top of the hull. The communications suite receives a massive upgrade. In her old life, the Florida only needed to receive a launch order. In her new life, she needs to be a command center. She is fitted with high-bandwidth satellite antennas, allowing the embarked commander to direct drone strikes, coordinate with aircraft, and communicate with teams on the ground in real time. She becomes a submerged Pentagon forward operating base. By early 2005, the heavy work is done. The hull cuts are welded shut, the new systems are wired in, the reactor is fueled and sealed. On February 10, 2005, water flows back into Dry Dock 4. The USS Florida floats again. She looks the same on the outside, a long black cylinder, but inside, she is a completely different animal. On March 25, 2006, she casts off from the pier at Norfolk for her sea trials. This is the final exam for the billion-dollar investment. The crew takes her out to the Virginia Capes to prove that the new weight distribution hasn't ruined her stability, that the new communications masts don't leak, and that the reactor can still drive the boat at high speeds. She passes with flying colors. The hull is sound. The systems integrate perfectly. The Florida heads south to her new home port at Naval Submarine Base Kings Bay, Georgia, arriving on April 11th. The formal return to the fleet occurs on May 25, 2006. A ceremony is held in Mayport, Florida. The atmosphere is celebratory but serious. The Florida is no longer SSBN 728, a designation that marked her as a ballistic missile submarine. She is now SSGN 728. The G stands for Guided Missile. It is a single letter change that signifies a profound shift in philosophy. She is no longer a weapon of last resort. She is a weapon of first response. The United States Navy now possesses a platform that combines the stealth of a submarine with the firepower of a battleship. The Florida can park off a hostile coast for months, unseen and unheard, listening to enemy communications, mapping their radar, and waiting. And if the order comes, she can unleash a barrage of 154 missiles without ever breaking the surface. However, as the crew settles into their new routine at Kings Bay, a question remains. The technology is impressive on paper. The tests in the Bahamas were successful. The sea trials proved the boat can sail, but the Florida has never fired a shot in anger. The concept of the SSGN is still theoretical in the eyes of military historians. No submarine has ever attempted to influence a land war on the scale the Florida is designed for. The skeptics argue that the conversion was too expensive, that the mission profile is too niche. They question whether a submarine needs this much conventional firepower. The answer will not come from a simulation or a war game. It will come from the Mediterranean Sea. 5 years after her rebirth, on a dark night in March 2011, the USS Florida will find herself lurking off the coast of North Africa. The world is watching a dictator threaten his own people with annihilation. The United Nations is demanding action. The air defenses are active and dangerous. The time for testing is over. The Florida is about to show the world exactly what she has become. The Ghost is about to open fire. As the first decade of the 21st century draws to a close, the geopolitical landscape shifts once again. The Cold War is a memory, but the world has not become safer. It has become more volatile, fragmented into regional conflicts where speed and precision matter more than raw nuclear tonnage. In February 2011, this volatility erupts across North Africa in a wave of unrest known as the Arab Spring. In Libya, what begins as a series of protests demanding reform quickly escalates into a full-scale civil war. The government, led by Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, responds with overwhelming military force. Security battalions deploy armor and artillery against population centers. By March, the situation reaches a critical breaking point. Regime forces are advancing on Benghazi, the second largest city in the country. The rhetoric is dark and uncompromising. The leadership in Tripoli vows to hunt down the rebels house by house and show no mercy. The international community watches with growing alarm. Intelligence reports suggest a massacre is imminent. On March 17th, the United Nations Security Council passes Resolution 1973, authorizing member states to take all necessary measures to protect civilians. The resolution explicitly allows for the enforcement of a no-fly zone to ground the Libyan Air Force. But a no-fly zone is not a simple administrative decree. It is a combat operation. To enforce it, Allied aircraft must patrol Libyan airspace. However, Libya possesses a dense, integrated air defense network. Gaddafi has spent billions of dollars over decades purchasing Soviet-made hardware. The coast is lined with long-range Say-5 Gammon missiles, overlapping radar systems, and mobile surface-to-air batteries. If a NATO fighter jet crosses the coastline without preparation, it will be targeted and likely destroyed. Before the skies can be safe for patrols, the air defense network on the ground must be dismantled. This requires a kick-down-the-door force, a weapon that can strike heavily defended targets without warning and without exposing pilots to lethal return fire. This is the moment the USS Florida was rebuilt for. By happenstance and strategic foresight, the submarine is already in the theater. She is in the midst of a routine deployment, her second since the conversion. The Gold Crew, commanded by Captain Thomas Calabrese, is at the helm. For weeks, they have been operating in the Mediterranean, submerged and silent, monitoring the deteriorating situation through their advanced sensor suite. When the diplomatic solution fails, the military gears begin to turn. On March 18th, the Florida receives her execute orders. The operation is codenamed Odyssey Dawn. The objective is the suppression of enemy air defenses. The submarine moves into her launch basket, a designated patch of ocean within range of the Libyan coast, but deep enough to remain hidden. Inside the boat, the atmosphere shifts from the routine of patrol to the cold focus of combat. The announcement, "Man Battle Stations Missile," rings out. But this time, there is no exercise suffix. This is not a drill for a nuclear war that will never happen. This is a conventional strike that is about to happen. The crew moves with practiced efficiency. In the Missile Control Center, the firing teams verify the targeting data downloaded from the National Command Authority. The list is extensive. It includes 190 individual aim points, early warning radar installations, communication bunkers, command centers, and missile battery sites. These targets are the eyes and ears of the Libyan military. The plan calls for a coordinated strike involving the Florida and two British submarines, HMS Triumph and HMS Trafalgar. But the American SSGN is the heavyweight in the ring. She carries more firepower than the other vessels combined. On the night of March 19th, the Mediterranean is dark. The Florida hovers at launch depth. The pressure in the boat is equalized. The hydraulic hatches on the missile tube slide open, exposing the watertight capsules to the sea. At approximately 8:00 p.m. local time, the captain gives the order. In the missile compartment, the silence is broken by the violent rush of pressurized gas. The first Tomahawk cruise missile is ejected from its tube. It punches through the water, breaking the surface in a frothing geyser. The booster rocket ignites with a blinding flash, sending the weapon skyward. Moments later, the booster falls away, the stubby wings unfold, and the turbofan engine spools up. The missile noses over, dropping to treetop altitude, and accelerates toward the coast. Then comes another, and another. The Florida shudders rhythmically as the missiles leave the tubes. In the control room, the status boards light up green. Launch successful. Transition successful. Flight path nominal. This is where the engineering of the SSGN concept proves its terrifying value. A standard attack submarine might fire a dozen missiles before needing to reload or maneuver. The Florida keeps firing. She functions as a submerged artillery battery. Through the night and into the early morning hours of March 20th, the launch sequence continues. The crew works in a steady, relentless cadence. They are managing a complex choreography of ballasting the ship to compensate for the weight of the departing missiles while maintaining a precise depth. They are monitoring the health of the remaining rounds. They are listening for any sign that the launch flares have been detected by enemy anti-submarine forces. By the time the firing ceases, the USS Florida has launched 93 Tomahawk cruise missiles. It is a historic expenditure of ordnance. In a span of roughly 8 hours, this single submarine has fired nearly as many missiles as were used in the entire opening phase of the 1991 Gulf War air campaign. 93 missiles leave the tubes. 90 of them score direct hits. The effect on the ground is catastrophic for the regime's defenses. Across the Libyan coast, radar screens go blank. Command bunkers erupt in flames. Surface-to-air missile sites are turned into twisted metal before their operators can even lock onto a target. The integrated air defense network is not just damaged, it is blinded and decapitated. When dawn breaks on March 20th, Allied fighter jets roar into Libyan airspace. They encounter almost no resistance. The sky belongs to them. The no-fly zone is established immediately, halting the advance of the armored columns toward Benghazi and altering the course of the civil war. The Florida slips away into the deep water, her tubes largely empty, her mission complete. She has executed the largest submarine missile strike in naval history. She has done so without ever being detected, without risking a single sailor, and without a single piece of enemy hardware touching her hull. The validation is absolute. The skeptics who questioned the billion-dollar conversion cost are silenced by the operational reality. The Florida demonstrated that a submarine could be more than a passive deterrent or a hunter of other ships. She proved that an SSGN could influence the strategic outcome of a land war from the sea. On April 29, 2011, the Florida returns to Kings Bay, Georgia. She has been at sea for 14 months, swapping crews to maintain the deployment. As she pulls into the warm, marshy waters of the base, the crew on deck looks different than the men who laid her keel in 1976. They are combat veterans now. The Navy recognizes the magnitude of the achievement. On February 15, 2013, the crew is awarded the Navy Unit Commendation. It is the first time an Ohio-class submarine has received a combat decoration. The citation notes their exceptional performance and historic achievement in dismantling the air defense system of a sovereign nation. The USS Florida continues to serve long after the Libyan intervention. She deploys again and again, prowling the waters of the Middle East and the Pacific. She carries out missions that remain classified, utilizing her special operations capabilities to insert teams into hostile environments under the cover of darkness. But her identity is forever forged by that single night in the Mediterranean. Her story is a testament to the adaptability of American engineering. She was born as a creature of the Cold War, a machine designed for a doomsday that never arrived. She was built to hide in the deep, clutching nuclear fire to her chest, waiting for the order to end the world. When that world changed, she did not go to the scrapyard. She evolved. She traded her nuclear trident for a conventional sword. She traded the passive watch for the active strike. From the drawing boards of the Stratex study in 1966, through the freezing cold of the North Atlantic patrols, to the fiery waters of the Libyan coast, the Florida has mirrored the history of the nation that built her. She represents the shift from the brute force of the 20th century to the precision warfare of the 21st. Today, the Florida and her SSGN sisters are approaching the end of their extended service lives. New submarines, the Columbia-class and the Virginia Block V, are being built to take their place. Eventually, the Florida will make her final journey to the recycling facility in Bremerton, Washington. The reactor that was first tested in 1982 will be shut down forever. The steel hull that withstood the crushing pressure of the deep will be cut apart. But until that day comes, she remains out there, somewhere in the black water, silent, unseen, and ready. The ghost that became a warrior is still on patrol. As we look back on the long, strange life of the USS Florida, we are left with a story that is about more than just rivets, reactors, and missiles. It is a story about the passage of time and the unpredictable nature of history. When those workers stood in the Groton shipyard on the Bicentennial in 1976, watching the fireworks explode over the Thames River, they could never have imagined that the keel they were laying would one day fire cruise missiles at a regime in North Africa. They were building a shield against the Soviet Union, a wall of steel to hold back the darkness of nuclear winter. That wall held. The darkness never fell. In many ways, the greatest victory of the Florida's first life was the silence, the missiles that never flew, the warheads that were never armed. The men who spent months underwater, missing birthdays, anniversaries, and the simple feeling of sunlight on their faces, bought that peace with their time. They served in a world of silence so that the world above could live in noise. But machines, like people, must adapt to survive. The Florida's second act reminds us that utility is often a matter of imagination. The decision to cut her open and rebuild her was a gamble, a belief that an old hull could learn new tricks. It speaks to a distinctly American quality of reinvention, the refusal to let a valuable asset fade away, simply because the original plan changed. There is a quiet dignity in the Florida's service. She is a vessel that has spanned eras. She has carried the weight of the apocalypse and the precision of modern intervention. She has been a phantom and a hammer, and through it all, she has remained a home to thousands of sailors who slept fitfully in her bunks, ate in her galley, and trusted their lives to her pressure hull. The technology of warfare changes. The geopolitical maps are redrawn. Enemies become trading partners, and new threats emerge from the shadows. But the ocean remains the same, vast, crushing, and indifferent. And for nearly half a century, the Florida has mastered it. As she nears the end of her operational life, she leaves behind a legacy of deterrence and action. She is a reminder that the most powerful weapons are often the ones we never see, and that the greatest engineering feats are the ones that can change their purpose when the world demands it. If this journey through the hidden history of the Cold War and beyond meant something to you, we'd be honored to have you with us again. Until next time, stay curious and take good care.